they can relate to it because they've experienced flooding in those areas that are shown to be susceptible. So this is kind of in the core near the water, and there was flooding all the way up, or all the way up that road, and other parts of the community as well. So this is not a necessarily novel thing for North Rustico. They know that they experienced flooding, and they know where they've seen it before. And when you show them the 2050, it gives them some perspective as to how much worse it could be in comparison to what they've seen before.
Is the data structured first within the GIS?
Yeah.
For example, if you wanted to add a national park,
It should be available to do that. We're the sea level rise mapping that we're doing right now, we've just in the last month embarked on doing that, and we're doing it internally. And we've done it for 4 communities that we've been working with to get an idea of how much resource it's going to take us to do the entire island, but our plan is to do the entire island. And I presented last month to Parks Canada. They had a meeting here, and they expressed their interest in having this information for their planning purposes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you think, Erin, there's any, the draft goes until March 31st, or has some portion of it extended?
Our funds end on March 31st. All the projects need to be rolled up by the end of December of this year. So our mapping component is being done internally. So whether it will be done by March 31st isn't a big concern to us. It will continue as long as it takes us to get it done. And then we'll see what the next phase of adaptation programming within NRCan might look like. So some of the ways that we're using this information, of course, is to assess risk to current infrastructure on the ground. And you can see what infrastructure may be at risk based on those maps. Also using it, of course, to determine, well, where should we build new infrastructure? And emergency planning as well is an important component. You can see here, the fire department sits down in the storm surge, a 1 in 10 year storm surge zone by 2050. And there are already North Rustico experiences stranded residents when you get a storm surge. So this area here cuts off all of those residents from any type of emergency services when you get a storm surge. And that happened last December, or December 21st, 2010. There's about 80 residents that get stranded when that happens. And this is the 2100 map. And the number of stranded residents grows because up at the top of the map there you see that road is not accessible during the storm surge either. So now you have those residents as well as that pocket of residents there. So this information can help the community look at this and say, perhaps we need another access road in a different location in order to make sure that we don't have residents that can't access fire and emergency services during the storm surge. It can also help us do some tide surge monitoring. We don't have a wealth of tide gauges. We have one in Charlottetown. We don't have any on the North Shore. And of course, it's a very different dynamic. What you experience in the Northumberland Strait versus what you experience on the North Shore. You can have something that barely registers at the Charlottetown tide gauge that has a huge impact on the North Shore. And you know, we don't have a great way of saying, well, how big was it? Other than residents saying, well, the water went to here. But with LiDAR data, you can go back and say, well, if it went to here, well, this is the elevation of this place. on a map, and then you can work backwards to say, well, it was probably a surge of about this amount. This was a photo from October 5th, 2011, and this is heading into the National Park at Brackley. And this is this road, and it's a particularly low-lying area. It's got swamp on kind of either side of it, and the water is just about to the top of the road here. And like I said, this was just really a high water event. It was no major wind and wave associated with it, so it wasn't particularly damaging. But there was lots of talk during this event as to whether that road was going to be shut down into the national park. So this photo was taken actually by one of our GIS programmers. And then he went back to the office and generated this map. Based on what he had observed, this is where he felt the water was. And so it's interesting to use it in that capacity as well. We've also used it in a project that we've been working on to classify our shoreline. And the other provinces have similar projects underway. And what we wanted to do was have a very general shoreline classification in order to identify areas that were at risk to erosion, for example, just based on the geology of the shoreline. So the person who did the shoreline classification also used our LiDAR data in order to differentiate what was bluff and what was cliff, just based on the elevations and the slope of the land leading up to those areas. So it was useful in that application as well. Yep. The other tool that we've been using in order to do our work has been using aerial images. As a province, we gather aerial images at more regular intervals now. We have a series that goes back to 1935 up to 2010. And this is an image from 2010 aerial photos of Northwest Hill. So we've been looking at these photos as well as a means to identify, monitor, and measure coastal change. We've always had coastal change. Our shorelines change on a very regular basis. They change from season to season, from year to year. You have, in the summer you have sand that gets deposited on the shore. In the winter you get sand that gets pulled off of the shore. There are regular cycles to how sand moves. And we constantly have change, which became evident as we started to compare some of the shorelines, and you have areas where you get huge changes. Sand is just shifting. Sometimes it shifts back and forth. Sometimes it goes offshore and into. One of the things we did with the aerial photos is we delineated the coastlines in a series of aerial photos in order to compare those coastlines and look at what the erosion rates were throughout the province. So we looked at the 68, 2000, and 2010 aerial photos. And people often ask me, why the 68? You had 58s and 35s to go back to. 35s, well, they were taken in 1935. The quality of those images are not fantastic for doing any kind of detailed analysis. The 58 series wasn't complete, so there's some pieces missing. So the 68 was the most complete series that was of reasonable quality. So we went and delineated where those coastlines were, which I can tell you right now was not an easy task. It's an interpretive task. It is not a quantitative task necessarily. In some places it is very interpretive. There was a methodology, of course, as to how we were going to define where the coastline was, but there's still room for interpretation in that process. And then when you deal with some of these issues like you saw with New London and Tracadie, where you have such major shifts, it can lead to some funny numbers. And one of the ways, of course, that we're going to use that information is to assess risk to current infrastructure. This is as they call it, Victoria, the bathhouse, associated with the Bridge Park. And that bathhouse gets progressively closer to the shore each year. And so with the information that we have, we can say, this structure probably, we're losing that shore at this rate. Now, that doesn't mean we're losing that every year, right? You lose the shore in chunks, and it's usually storm generated, storm mediated. So it's not like if we've got a number here, if we're losing half a meter or a meter a year, you've necessarily got, 20 years if you're 20 meters back from the shore. Not necessarily the case. But it gives some indication as to what the risk is, and some indication as to what infrastructure could be vulnerable. We are using it as far as siting new infrastructure. Our Planning Act has setbacks associated with erosion, so you can build a structure or build a lot 60 feet from the shore, or 60 times the annual erosion rate is what the policy is now. So these erosion rates drive the provincial setbacks. This is our kind of repository for our information from the Atlantic RAC. This is our website, www.atlanticadaptation.ca. So there you can find reports